Hi everybody and welcome to another GMG Throwback Thursday review. Now today we're going to take a look at Forces of Fantasy. This was a supplement that added on to Warhammer Fantasy Battle 1st edition a couple years after release. And this is, I want to put this in context because this is actually a really important expansion for the game. It's from the same era of model shops buying box sets, so you'll see that it's a bunch of books in a box. And this is to the 1st edition of Warhammer Fantasy Battle what the first General's Handbook was to the 1st edition of Warhammer Age of Sigmar. Because in the 1st edition of Warhammer Fantasy Battle, there was no points. It was a free-form RPG, do-what-you-feel mass combat game where you collected armies, put them on the table, and played each other. And this gave it some structure. So almost exactly like the General's Handbook, when this was released, what you started to see was things like point values and recommended sizes for units, and even some of the most famous Regiments of Renown who existed right up until 8th edition Warhammer Fantasy Battle. These characters who've been in the game for so long actually originate in this book. It's beautifully illustrated by Tony Ackland and John Blanche. John doing the cover and some of the interior art, and Tony doing a lot of stuff in the interior. This is from the same era that both of them were working on Fighting Fantasy as well. So if you were a fan of those pick your path, choose your own adventure novels, a lot of this art's actually going to be familiar because a lot of this was actually in those books too. So let's crack it open. We got some dwarves fighting some skeletons in the front, some scary mans in a spooky wood. Beautiful John Blanche color, and colorized actually like ink drawing, it looks like too. Just classic Blanche. I love it. Such a great cover. And then inside you'll see that these books even are slightly different. They have a brown printing instead of black and white now, and you can tell that there's a certain amount of like, I would say growth in between this product and the 1st edition rulebooks that you saw before. The interior, the artwork's a lot different, and you've got a real sense of like, oh yeah, this is actually like, we're doing this now. Like they've learned basically from making the previous books. Now there's 4 books in here: Forces of Fantasy, the Fighting Fantasy Battles, you have Arcane Magics, and then you have Forces of Fantasy, which is some of your regiments around and stuff. And then here we got the Book of Battalions, the big Book of Battalions, which is an additional, actually, it feels like it's almost newsprint publication. I'm not sure if this was added in later, because this is a second printing. I do know that all of this stuff was added in later, because these are the addendums. This is what they used to do instead of doing like an FAQ, because I mean, there's no internet, right? There's nowhere to put this stuff up online. What they would do is subsequent printings would have this stuff put in here. So this is actually almost like a buy list. So you could get, so this is crazy. So let's look at this. This is a catalog insert for some of the new releases at the time. So this is to go with this booklet right here, which is a whole bunch of like pre-made armies that you can buy, the Book of Battalions. So if you want to buy army number 8, the Conjurations of Colin, it's an undead army, you would get 60 assorted skeletons. These are all lead, remember. 10 assorted skeleton riders, 15 mummies, 30 zombies, 15 ghouls, 5 wraiths, 5 wights, 5 specters, 3 evil necromancers, and 5 assorted undead heroes for £42 sterling. So think about that. That is 60, 70, 85, 115, 130, 145, 153 miniatures for £42. So yeah, so less than like 30p per miniature, all in lead. Madness. And then army number 9, Gloon's Trek the Giants. You get 4 Citadel Giants, 5 medium-sized Ralpartha Giants, 10 assorted Citadel Small Giants, 10 assorted Minotaur Ogre Small Giants, and then 1 assorted assortment of heads and bits for the Giants for £34. And you were getting basically 4 giants, 5 medium giants, 20 ogre-sized miniatures, and a bunch of bits for £34. It's madness. I love it. I love looking at this stuff. And this is all just mail-away stuff. So you would check out what you wanted, and it just literally put cash in an envelope, put your name and address, and they would mail it to you. How cool is that on pink stuff? The big Book of Battalions. These are all the armies you get. Oh my gosh, is there a samurai one? There is. The army number 6, Sanyo Kawasaki, his samurais. Sanyo Kawasaki, I think that's definitely a joke on 2 contemporary electronics makers of the time. 20 sword samurai, 20 sword ashigaru. They didn't spell it right. It's Asiguru is what they spelled there, which should be Ashigaru. 10 mounted samurai, 15 Vim 2 monks, and then 5 assorted samurai with leaders and stuff like that for £26. Crazy. I love seeing this old stuff. And then, yeah, we'll look at this afterwards. And then this was a Hobgoblin set of rules for Hobgoblins in the game because they weren't in the book. So people asked for Hobgoblins. There was Hobgoblin miniatures, and this added them basically in there. Yeah, pretty neat. So let's take a look at these books then. Back cover, you can see Force of Fantasy, made in England, 1984 is when this was printed. So definitely, oh God, it's 84, 35 years old. 35 years old right now, older than probably like a bunch of you watching this video. So let's look at this afterwards because this was one of the deal books. So Fighting Fantasy Battles. So you can see here Rick Priestley and Brian Ansell, the authors. It's so funny looking through these books right now and also reviewing all the other games I've been reviewing. I've been paying a lot of attention to the credits plates in the books and noticing when people are actually crediting authors and designers and when they're not. And it's really interesting to see how some companies have gotten to the point where they don't credit individual designers anymore because there's so many people working on a project that there's actually like departments for everything. So you don't have one person even responsible for the whole development. So here we go, Fighting Fantasy Battles. Setting up your battlefield. So now finally, what this did, like I said, it's like the General's Handbook. It gives you some guidelines for doing stuff. Now it still does ask that you have a game master. If two players are going to fight a fantasy battle, then the first thing they'll need to do is get a third person to act as the games master or umpire. It's the game master's responsibility to enforce the rules of the game and to interpret them where necessary. It's possible to fight a friendly game without a GM so long as both players are willing to cooperate a little and adopt a reasonable attitude. So think about that. In the old days, before points and stuff, you would literally arbitrate through a third person how to set up and play your game. Now, this is the first baby steps towards not needing to do that because you would all of a sudden have a format for doing so. You'll need a fairly large table or an area floor. 6x4 is about the right size. Obviously, the scenery available will dictate the extent and type that you'll have. When positioning scenery, the GM can adopt one of several policies. One, he can either set it up at his own discretion. He can set it up symmetrically so that no one has an advantage. He can ask the players to secretly write down how many pieces of scenery they would like on the table, up to a maximum of 1 per foot of table length. The GM can then apply a +/- 1 modifier. The whole rubric for doing this. And actually some diagrams too, which were of course missing from the first book because it was all just typed text. And then you can also just use this table. So percentage chance, you could have a wood, it could be a spider's den, a scorpion's lair, a wolf den, or just have a tree man in it. Buildings and ruins could be full of rats, beetles, they could be a barrow, it could be haunted with a ghost. So yeah, you've got wild events tables here too for all of your terrain. Sound familiar? It kind of is. Then you decide your deployment zones. In a straight encounter game, each player may set his troops up within half of the table, within 6 inches of the starting edge. An example of this tabletop setup for battle would look like this. So a 6-inch deployment zone was the standard deployment for this edition. Players then alternate first placing a unit, and then B placing a unit, and so on. As an alternative, both players may make a rough map of the battlefield with their initial deployments, and then reveal at the same time. That's great. And then it added rules for engines of war, so bolt throwing engines and how they would move around the table. Stone throwing engines using the Splat template, which was 1.5 inches. Again, photocopy this, don't cut it out. You want to cut this page right here. Chariots, mounting and dismounting for cavalry. Attacking fortifications and buildings. Firing weapons. Buildings may also be damaged by fire, so having fires on a building. And then a remade turn sequence. This turn sequence, given the first edition of Warhammer, should read as follows. Each player takes a turn in rotation. If the games master has troops to move, then he must select to do so before or after other players, but must be consistent. So this is a reprinting basically to clarify how this stuff interacts with what's new and to come. So it's still movements. The active player may move any of their troops. Shooting, the active player may shoot. Combat, any opposing troops in base-to-base contact will fight. Second movement, the active player may now move any ones that didn't fight. Magic phase, the active player may now cast implement spells, and then red phase. So really the only addendum here is that both sides don't shoot, because in the first layout for this, in the first rulebook when you saw it, both sides were always shooting in the shooting phase. Returning fire, fighting defensively, magicians not wearing armor, and then leadership, intelligence, willpower, and cool, the big stats for everybody. Rules for mounted troops. And mercenaries. Now this is neat. So when you have neutral things on the table or you hire mercenaries that aren't part of your same faction, You can have 200 to 300 points of these units. When they become notoriously unreliable, the first time a mercenary band comes within 16 inches of the enemy, they must test for their loyalty. Roll a d6. On a 1, they decide to throw in with their enemies, and the regiment becomes part of the enemy army. On a 2, they decide that this war is not for them, the regiment marches away, and then on a 3+, they remain loyal. So mercenaries were risky. You had a 33% chance they either went home or joined the enemy. I mean, it did let you take stuff out of your faction and out of character, but still really interesting. And then generating mercenary bands, only neutral characters can be mercenaries, and they may fight alongside good, evil, or other neutral troops. Generally, mercenary bands are using the following chart. So if you want to use mercenaries, roll D100. It could be dwarves, gnomes, men of the west, men of the east, men of the north, men of the orient, slans, ogres, lizardmen, or giants. And the number would also be a table. So on a D6, you'd have 20 giants. What? Because why not? And then they'd have a leader who could be a minor hero, mighty hero, or regular hero. Now that categorization of heroes from minor through hero through mighty hero actually followed on all the way into like 5th edition fantasy. That was the typical classification, and every hero that you bought up until that point in a rulebook typically had 3 stat lines, even in 40k. And it was just to differentiate how experienced basically they were. So your rank didn't matter so much as your experience level mattered. And that's a really interesting like RPG mindset to put in a game. Like an Empire General, if he's not very experienced, is still an Empire General, but he could be, like he's still in charge of the army, but if he's a minor hero, he might not be as powerful as, let's say, like the champion or some guy leading your force or your battle standard bearer if he was a mighty hero. Which I think is interesting, because like in the current editions of, and even up until like 7th and 8th, edition Warhammer Fantasy Battle, your general is always your mightiest hero. Their experience level and prowess always befit their position, whereas in this one, narratively, you could have a weak leader if that was something that you wanted to have in your story, and the game kind of let you do that. And it kind of just sort of just evaporated and left the rules over time. Mustering your army, collecting miniatures, some wonderful banners and stuff like this. I love this Tony Alclin stuff. Really, really cool. Oh, geez, you wouldn't put that in a book today. Holy moly. Where else? We got some crazy sort of like Celtic stuff, bleeding moons. I wonder if that's a precursor to the bad moon. And then armies, organizations, and tactics. So everyone in here, chaos, men of the west, men of the orient, all of these have their own sort of like basic disposition. So chaos's organization would be from 16 to 24 models for most infantry, with monsters and other troops in units of convenient size. Tactics, with such a diversity of troops, the Chaos General may adapt to tactics freely they fit. And then painting, they like to wear black because they're edgy. Men of the West, mounted troops are organized into regiments of 10 men with infantry into 20 to 24. And then Men of the Orient, samurai fight in impromptu units with as little as 5 or as many as 30. Cavalry regiments and monks are generally organized in smaller units between 5 and 10 models. Men of the East, Easterners are organized into quite formal regiments, usually between 20 and 30 infantry, with skirmishers operating in small units between 5 and 12. Cavalry regiments vary between 10 and 20. Norsemen, Norse organizations between 10 and 30 men. Cavalry, when present, orientate into smaller units of under 10 men. The Norse berserkers are a disorganized and drunken bunch. They tend to get together before a battle and fight in either 1 or 2 units. That's an interesting, like that's like not even historically accurate at all about the berserkers. I mean, they might have been crazy, or they might have been, you know, they weren't drunk, I don't think. Dwarves are tribal, with numerous family subgroupings. A typical regiment will be in 20 dwarf guards units, in regiments of 10, and militia can be in any size. Mounted dwarfs will be regiments of 5. Mounted dwarf units, I wonder what mounted dwarf units were in here. Nice big Tony Alclin illustration in the middle here. We got some dark elves fighting some orcs. And it's interesting because this is the old orc aesthetic at GW, and I wonder how long. I think it was when Brian Nelson started sculpting. So probably for like at least 20 years. The Brian Nelson orcs are in the 2000-2001 box set, so the 6th edition box set. So almost 20 years this was the orc sort of style until Brian started sculpting for them and that aesthetic changed. Dark Elves, they retain a constant vigil. Typical regiment will be between 10 and 20 men, and mounted regiments of 5. High Elves, 5 and 20. Sea Elves, because you gotta have Sea Elves. Oh my gosh, look at this. Crazy banners. I like the one with the dragonfly, it's cool. And then these 2 confused fish. They look they don't know what's going on at all. What else we got here? Giants, organization, nope, not at all. Giants are sometimes organized in family units. Tactics, not a hope. Giants like to blunder about causing as much damage as possible. Gnomes are typically organized into family groups in the same way as dwarves, typically unit size between 10 and 20. Great goblins. Okay, so I wonder if the hobgoblins, because you got great goblins, red goblins, what other goblin types are in here? Night goblins, halflings, and hobgoblins. No, hobgoblins are in there. So great goblins, I guess, are just great. They're just the best of all goblins. They're the alpha goblins. Regiments can be any size, but 20 as usual. Red goblins, again, 20. And this is where we start to see background. The Warhammer world begins to emerge, basically, out of this stuff. Night goblins, yay! They're not really great warriors. In fact, Night Goblin commanders spend most of the time watching their troops exercise a series of routes, retreats, and tactical withdrawals. Halflings, they dislike organization of any kind. Hobgoblins are powerful fighters and they prefer a smaller unit size, 10 to 20 men. Lizard men, no formal organization, built around chieftains. Regiment, so normally regiment we 10 to 30. Cold ones are rare and have mostly small units. Troglodytes usually have smaller regiments. I forgot there was troglodytes. And then orcs, 16 to 20, riding wyverns are banded into small regiments up to 5. So riding wyverns were like a unit back then, not like a single guy, a single hero on a wyvern. The idea was that you had like a unit of wyverns, which is awesome. Slan! This is actually, does it say lizardmen back there? It does say lizardmen, and Slan is being different. Slan Empire soldiers usually in units of 20. I guess they were just separate back then. Undead, regiments of undead can be organized into any convenient size, 10 to 20. They're quite powerful, and there's no need to employ large regiments, apparently. The undead are quite powerful. That's not something that's remained true. The skeleton warrior is not super powerful in the newer editions. Cavalry are more usefully employed in units of 5. And that was it. So that was your basic like structure. Now the next couple books, Force of Fantasy and Arcane Magics, are gonna give you some point values and stuff, but those are like your army building guidelines now. If you're gonna pick one of these formal army structures, here's some general ideas on how to paint them, what their tactics might be like, and how they'd be organized on the table. That's it. So like, you got to think that this was from nothing to something. So while it doesn't seem like a big step today to give you a formal army organization, this was a lot of information for back then. You've kind of got some world building happening, and they're telling you how these different races, these fantasy races, like basically like organize themselves and their lives. So everything to do with the Warhammer Fantasy Old World kind of grew out of these books, because this is where it started to kind of all get laid out for the first time. And now, here you're going to start seeing some familiar names. Here's some regiments of renown. And what these were is they were pre-generated regiments with heroes and stories that were themed around certain races that were already described there. So if you pick one of these factions to play, you could employ this unit, and they were, I think, mostly included as examples of what you could do. Later on, they became kind of like semi-famous and kind of beloved in the lore, and so they all got miniatures, I think, along the way. A few didn't, but you're gonna hear some real familiar names here, such as, start off with, Bugman's Dwarf Rangers. Joseph Bugman gives the story about him quabbling with goblins and how he hates them, what he's armed with, his heroic profile, his movement of 3.5 inches, because we're still doing fractions, his weapon skill of 5, his ballistic skill of 3, strength 2, toughness C, we're still using letters, I love it. 1 wound, initiative 2, 1 attack, and he's 13 points. So those are the ranger profile guys in there. And then Joseph Bugman is described as being like a certain level of hero. Then we got the Knights of Origo. The island outposts of Phyrus seem a good place for the monks of the Holy Order of St. Origo to build a monastery. And so these are kind of like Bretonnian knights, maybe, questing knights. They've got that like, that sort of like look to them where they kind of have the old like Norman sort of like knight's helmet and the same like with the flyaway wings and stuff. They did not get a new unit later on, but they may have evolved into the Bretonnians. So standard human stat line, movement 3, because they're wearing heavy armor, because that reduces your movement in this game. Weapon skill 4, ballistic skill 3, strength 2, toughness B, 1 wound, initiative 3, and 1 attack, and they're 10 points each for these knights. All of the knights are subject to frenzy, never take morale tests, and add 1 to fear and terror throws. Throws. They hate all non-Westerners in frenzy. They disregard the normal requirements to discard their armor. So they don't get naked for being frenzied, which was literally the rule that we discussed last one. Grom's Goblin Guard, it's Grom the Paunch, and there it is. There's his paunch right there. How awesome is that? It's Paunchy Grom. Mengel Manhides, Company of Dark Elves, so it's Mengel's Manflayers. And there's Mengele himself. You've got Harboth of the Black Mountain Boys, Mad Mullah Ackland's Death Commandos. That's Tony Ackland as like a joke, basically. The Bowmen of Orion. Here's some that didn't make the cut, basically, to future stuff. And then Golgfag's Regiment of Mercenary Ogres. And there he is, Golgfag himself. These were some of my favorite Citadel Ogres from back then. And I think a few of them are actually skilled by Jess Goodwin. My favorite one is the one dressed up like an Empire guy with the great sword. He is such an awesome miniature. I had a bunch of those like ogres at one point, and I've since lost all of them. And one of my great regrets is that some of my, like all that old Empire C-Series stuff that I don't have anymore, because it just didn't survive various moves and go to different countries and stuff like that. But the old original Golgfag ogres and those old Jess Goodwin ogres are just phenomenal. So cool. And then heroes and wizards. So here's your ability to generate basically a minor hero, a hero, or a mighty hero, and it's a table for each of the different races. So for like men, here's your like dice rolls to generate stuff. But it was all random still. So even though like the idea was you could make your own, or you could generate them and then try and find a miniature to accurately represent them. So this is my favorite. Your weapon skill, let's say you're a hero then. Your weapon skill is D4 plus 4. Your bow skill is 2D4. Your strength is D2 plus 1, so between 2 and 3. Your toughness is the same. D2 plus 1 instead of being B. I don't know what that means. I don't know how you translate that into a letter code. Maybe you would just count them up. So like A being 2, or B being 2, C being 3. I guess that's how you'd have to do it. And then wounds, he had D3, D4, D4 plus 1, so D4 for the hero. Initiative 2D6 plus 1, so he'd be initiative of 13. Ha! And then D3 attacks. You had a 25% chance of generating a magic weapon, a 10% chance of any other magic items, having D3 of them. You'd have 30% chance of having followers, like a retinue, and then there'd be 2D6 of them. A fantastic mount, you had a 5% chance of like riding like a griffin or something. And then you were 29 points. And then elves, dwarves, wizards, who could be apparently anyone. Oh no, sorry, it's any wizards. It's just elves, men, and dwarves. And then wizards, men, or elves, or dwarves. And then fantastic mounts. So you'd throw a D10, it could be a giant wolf, a centaur, a griffin, another griffin. Oh, sorry, because it's good guys are over here. So you're a hippogriff, you roll a 3 there, because they won't ride. Evil guys won't get one of those. Wizards could have a palanquin or a flightless riding reptile, flying riding reptile, chaos spawn riding beast, or a pegasus. So if you're a neutral or evil hero or wizard, you could be riding a chaos spawn. And then your followers could be men, elves, dwarves, depending on who they are. And then wizard followers could be monsters or creatures. And then generating creature followers, you could have things like an eagle or a rat or a giant spider or whatever. And so there it is. And there's your blasting boy in the back end. That's some creepy goat head, man. There's some Baphomet in the back of this one. So there's the first one, which is fighting fantasy battle. So giving some structure, like building your armies and like how to do that. And now we're gonna look at Arcane Magics. Once again, beautiful illustration on the covers by John Blanche. And sorry, the Force of Fantasy should have been the first one we did. This is volume 3. So new magic items, and what this really does is this puts in the rules for fantastical creatures, new magic items, new spells, a random item generator, magic weapons, power weapons, and then rune weapons. And yeah, you've got different things like flying carpets, enchanted ropes, enchanted bottles, enchanted rods, Rathnug's boots, jewels of power, Hamdork's shields of skepticism. Hamdork was a mighty warrior who both detested and strongly distrusted all things magical. His determination to be free of magic led him to make a shield constructed for himself and for each of his guardsmen, which would offer protection from the most powerful of magics. This shield is round and usually plain. It makes characters magic immune, as if they had a willpower of 16. And also causes any undead within 6 to make a compulsory roll for undead instability. Amulets, the rune dice, potions, all kinds of potions, blessings, bloodlust, curses, farsight, flight, frog potions, stone potions, shrink potions, mask potions, thunder hand potions, and then random treasures. Because remember, this is still like a quasi RPG. You're setting up and playing mass battles, but it's also designed to still do things like just like random dungeon crawls too, if you want to do that. So you've got treasure, things like what's in a domestic house, what's in a workshop, what's in a shrine, what's in a temple, what's in a treasury or a wizard's house. And then you roll to see what the value of something was. And this gives you, it's worth 12 pennies to a shilling and then 20 shillings to a crown. So something was nice or bad. And so here we go. So it gives you all of your different places from a domestic house. There's a 1% chance of a random talisman, 50% chance of D3 crowns, 75% of D20 shillings, and 95% of D20 pennies. And then you get everything. So like the treasury could have lots of stuff. And then like, what's this? Just a random money. A menagerie could have D1, an A chance of D100 animals. You roll the D100 table for animals. Things in graves, personal treasure and equipment for peasants, for citizens, merchants, for a fop. The fop is carrying good items. And then new monsters. So rules for things like genies. Because the first book only really included monsters that you might see on a battlefield for the most part. It didn't go into like the more esoteric kind of like RPG monsters. And this book added those in. Genies, chimeras, hydras, Balrogs. Look at that Balrog picture. That's madness. And then infestations, rules for having swarms, because there wasn't really any rules for swarms of characters at this point. So this gives you rules for swarms. New spells and random spells. Summon swarms. Magical items, random generators for magical items. Magical weapons. You found a dagger, a bladed weapon under 1 foot long, or a short spear, a spear under 6 foot long. Magical weapons. Now your weapons can have an alignment like evil, chaos, good, neutral, avarice, and hunger, just like all of your characters did. And weapon names, there's a 50% chance that has a name and a 75% chance that any sword will have a magical name. Common tongue, magic, and then enhanced user profiles that they can make your guys better. Special attack modes, ordinary abilities, could give people flying and stuff. Things you can't attack. And then power weapons. The old slant artificers who left the arcane rods on the earth, left other strange legacy, the power weapons. These two are usually made entirely of deep black indestructible substances, and usually 85% of the time take the form of swords, axes, hammers, and various exotically shaped weapons. Like the arcane rod, the power weapons also stores a strange sort of storage for magical power. And the basic idea here is you found a science fiction weapon. Yeah, and it's just rules for like if you found a lightsaber in a fantasy world, basically, and can it shoot lightning and laser. And then dwarf rune weapons, putting runes on here. Combining runes, runes of flight. This is the earliest incarnation, basically, of the old dwarf rune weapon rules, where you would have like different types of runes to put in your weapons and how they would combine and like talk to each other. And that's it. There's the magic of fantasy, and let's look at the forces of fantasy. So now this was where we actually got into like our stats for stuff. And sorry, I should have actually started with this one. I forgot it's not the other one first. There's a 3-volume compilation of all the information you need to choose and play your own fantasy army, inspiring leaders of men, and of those creatures of which there are other than men. So read on. So this gives you the idea for choosing an army and having a fighting battalion. A total of for example, one possible army could consist of 1 battalion of night goblins, 1 battalion of red goblins, and 1 battalion of undead. A total of 3,000 points for the troops. An army to oppose this can consist of 2 battalions of high elves and 1 battalion of dwarves. So the idea of each battalion was represented by one of those factions we talked about in the first book I showed you, which was the Fighting Fantasy Battles, which honestly should have been the first book in this series. And then they all have to be the same alignment. So you could have goblins, orcs, chaos warriors in the same army because they're all like the same chaotic alignment or whatever. You can use a random generator for making them, and then choosing your troops into regiments, between 5 and 30 models, regimental leaders, champions, and standard bearers are actually in here now, and rules for standards. And then lists and basic point values. So these are the basic point values for all the weapons they might be carrying to try and balance it out. So like, and again, they're all in fractions. So there's like a maddening amount of math here. So a sword, mace, or other item would be a half point. And the idea too is you have to point out your miniatures because it all has to be represented on a miniature. So everybody who's different has to have this like rubric done for them, and then per model you have to figure out how much they are. So Men of the East, you'd have your different dervish riders, elephants. So like a warrior would be 6 points, an elephant would be 90 points. And you can also have like your heroes and stuff. Men of the North, your warriors, bondsmen, berserkers, 5 points for a warrior. Men of the Orient, so your samurais, and they still didn't spell right, Ashi Gurus. Men of the West, knights, men-at-arms, crossbows, longbowmen, infantry, dwarfs, so guardsmen, warriors, militia, mounted dwarfs, and bolt throwers. Gnomes, that's a great gnome drawing. Oh my gosh, the size of that gnome's like head compared to the rest of his body, it's madness. Gnomes live in underground caverns like dwarves. They hate goblins, and for pretty much the same reason as dwarves. They have 24-inch night vision. Halflings. Oh my god, a gnome warrior is more points than a bondsman in a Viking army? Crazy. They're 6 points each. There we go. Halflings are 4 points. Dark elves, 8 points each because they got great stats. Because, of course, everyone's going off Tolkien elves here, so the elves are like superhuman. High elves, that's an excellent drawing. That's a great drawing. That's based on a classical painting, actually. Sea elves, now that's a very Elric looking sea elf there. 9 points each, 10 points for a high elf guardsman. Wood elves, 9 points each. Giants, 50 points each for small giants, which are almost like ogres. 120 points, 380 points for a true size giant. They get a bunch of pages and a fall down template, the first example of the giant fall down template, and even a random stagger and fall directional thing for falling them down. That's awesome how much work went into giants compared to the other races, because like they're big and they should have a cool impact on the table. And then goblins get their own section with like a crazy goblin header. Great goblins. That's great. Night goblins, and even then, look, they had the silly hats. They had the like stocking caps. And there's the first fanatic. The Night Goblin Fanatic is a strange and frightening creature. Promising young goblins are selected for incorporation into the ranks of the Fanatics. Each initiate is cruelly tortured and fed a constant diet of mystic herbal preparations. Needless to say, they're thoroughly insane and twisted. They walk around with a glazed expression and a permanent grin, but never speak to anyone. And lots of rules for Fanatics. There's your Fanatic template. Red Goblins, Hobgoblins, which I guess that entry was replaced by the one that was in the book over there. Orcs. Lizardmen, and then Slan being separate. Lizardmen being, I guess, like the feral version of Slan. And then Chaos! There's the Chaos Warrior riding a griffin. How cool is that guy? That's awesome. Undead. Lots of rules for Undead, and like they're falling apart and stuff. The Goodly Host, so things like dragons who are black, fire, gold, green, ice, or red. Eagles, Pegasi, Tree Man, Unicorn, Winged Panther. Marauding monsters. And that's it. And then let's take a look at these pre-generated ones right here, which is going to be the Book of Battalions, all in newsprint. This volume has been compiled by the many Warhammer players living in and around this bit of the East Midlands, so Nottinghamshire and Lincolnshire. This isn't part of Forces of Fantasy, but a free supplement. It's been written and partially produced at night and weekends, and is based on the force of the players listed below. We thought that other Warhammer players would be interested in seeing some of these armies that have battled through numerous playtesting and campaigns. Even these are by necessity only a small selection. Many of the tales surrounding the genesis of Warhammer must remain forever untold. What a great piece of history. So these are the armies of the people that play tested first edition Warhammer Fantasy Battle. And listen to some of these names. This is crazy because some of these names are awesome. Tony Ackland, Brian Ansell, of course, Nick Bibby, John Blanche, Pete Cantor, Charlie Elliott, Mark Elliott, Anthony Epworth, Richard Hallowell, another great game designer, John Manders, Alan Merritt, Colin McCormack and friends, Alan and Michael Perry, fantastic sculptors, Rick Priestley, Kevin Reed, Richard Stevens, John Stallard, the Players Guild, and Ben and Rick from Citadel. How cool is that? Just a rogues gallery of the original contributors basically to writing and playtesting this game. The Goblins of Rug Longtooth. Whose army is this? It doesn't say. That's great. But so the different battalions, right? So each one of the battalions would have a name. So Battalion 1 is led by Rug Longtooth, and it's full of his guards, the Axe Ministers, Grishnak's Regiment, Joe Dog's Regiment, the Boar Lancers, Mim's Regiment, and all of their like stuff that they had. Chicken George, Chick to his friends, is Rug's personal Great Goblin Shaman. Rug often suppresses George's desire to run away by tying him to his chariot. There's little stories in here. And then Battalion 2, Grimfang's Raiders, some Night Goblins. And the total for them was 259 points. Sorry, 963 points for the whole thing. Battalion 3, Jagglebursts Fell Raiders. The 3rd Battalion of Rug is made by Red Goblins. So it's Red Goblins, Night Goblins, and Great Goblins basically in an army. And the total is 3,066 points for this army. Berrigan Hogweed's Avengers. Berrigan Hogweed's a halfling mighty hero equipped with a magic sword, mail armor, and a shield. He's got the Halfling 10 Watchman, the Bog End Row Residents, the Cider Lane Residents, the Mill Lane Residents, and the Halflington Gardeners. They're 1,000 points. Then the 1st Battalion, Thor Wibble and his Gnomes are a 2nd Battalion, and Treebrain the Tree Man with some giant eagles. He's basically mobilized the Shire for 3,185 points. Gloon's Trek. The Giantlands up north, so Gloon Wayfoot, a true giant, and the Giant Friends, Herman Wayfoot, a true giant, and Stunto Wayfoot, a smaller giant. So it's 3 of them. And then the Rocklegs and Spindleims are giants about the same size, so just more giants. This was the guy that took the Knight Army in 1st edition Warhammer Fantasy Battle. He just took nothing but giants. He's like, what's the best thing in the game? Paint me 12 of those. And just took nothing but giants. 3,008 points. I wish I knew who had played these. Who took the Knight Army? I don't even know, but they eat a lot of halflings apparently. The Grand Elf Alliance. So Airdresser's King of the Sea Elves. And then he's got a Novice Wizard, Spearman of the White Havens, Van Heer of the Warrior of Barathone. And then there's some High Elves in there. Jerome Queasy and the High Elves of Forest Fields. Galaborville's Guard, Gil Haddock, the Elven Hero. And then Wood Elves. Wood Elves of Nottingham Forest. That's so funny. Rollo Tripleg is the king of the small elf land of Nottingham Forest. Nottingham Forest. That's 3,009.5 points. 9.5 points. The half points thing just slays me. Prince Wilhelm's Expedition. Some mighty Norsemen. Wilhelm rides a white horse, wears a suit of plate armor, and carries his famous sword, Exclaverer, in his beringed hand. Knights Hospitaller, Faithful Retainers, Knights. I guess these are men of the East, actually. The Duke of Rutland with men of arms, mounted men at arms, longbows, crossbows, light infantry, and peasants. And then the Wizard Marvo. Marvo is a reclusive and bad-tempered old wizard. Only a decade's unpaid income tax and an impending court summons could have persuaded Marvo into the wilds up north. He wears a very tall, pointy hat and a long cloak. He carries the magic sword Hellfist as well as his staff. And then Malcolm the Young Pretender. Marvo is accompanied by his good friend Malcolm, known as the Young Pretender, because he pretends to be younger than he really is. Malcolm is a hero with a profile as a hero. He wears a full suit of plate and carries a sword. 29.99.5 points. The Tale of Sanyo Kawasaki. Some samurai Ashiguru. Oh my god. I know how to actually say it properly, but I've read it wrong so many times now that I'm actually losing the ability to know what it should look like. Ashiguru, I don't think is the right word. Ashigaru, I think. I can't even tell anymore. I'm losing my mind. Battalion 1, Honda Suzuki leads that with Sansui Lee and the monks of Asagawa. The Vimto Mage Nito and his Akai are Battalion 2, and then Battalion 3 is nothing. So it's just they didn't even put anything in. They just left the formatting in there for some reason. Oh no, that's it. That's what that is. And it's 29.90.5 points. The Dwarfs of Horrorwell. And again, all of these things are things you could buy from the mail order catalog, which I think is hilarious. The Conjurations of the Insane Necromancer Colin. With hardly a thought of his friends and neighbors, peaceful law-abiding folk in large, Colin began his career as a necromancer. Nobody got any sleep in the town where he lived. Chickens were slaughtered and goats throttled and cattle horribly put to death, all in the early hours of the morning. The noise eventually drove the entire population away. Colin didn't take to solitude easily. Even before his isolation, he'd been a bit strange, and nobody would drink with him in the local inn. Now, however, the twisted mind took to plotting revenge, although against what or whom, he was not yet sure. 3,000 points on the nose, though. Colin was very precise. And then Yokurinki's Raiders. This mostly motley chaos forces caused so much havoc raiding the border townships of both sides during the Dwarkorf Kragspire Pass conflict. No real description of who they are. The Clawed Feet of Milk Beotles. The royal highway of this land stretches from north to south through steaming jungles and over tall and terrible mountains. It's a marvelous construction and a tribute to the old Slan engineers that built it. At the time of their descendants, the highway allows the passage of the Imperial Mail. The creature responsible for the passage of the mail is called Milk Beadle, and he has in his charge the upkeep of the highway. Such at the time, so rife is banditry and human incursion that even the postal service now warrants a special body of troops. These are the clawed feet of Milk Beadle, recruited from the spawnsmen of Zapotec and paid for out of imperial taxes. So it's literally the mail. It's the mail Slan. 2962. And then Arcane slays rabid reavers. It's a hobgoblin. That's great. He's the leader of the itinerant tribe of hobgoblins. His people are driven westward by the incursions of the evil Tin Khan, and his terrible horsemen. Tin Khan, terrible because they keep falling off. Kansley rose to become master of his tribe and led them into the territories of the men of the east, where he met the orc chieftain Strog, who liked to be known as the eater of halflings with onions. The two unpleasant characters got on like brothers, fighting, arguing, and trying to kill each other. After a few months, a few fatalities on both sides, and 2 major head wounds each, they decided to team up. And that's it. What a fantastic record of the playtesting of this game. So there it is, the 3 books of Forces of Fantasy, and a walk down memory lane on what in 1984 the General's Handbook basically looked like, giving you some structure to playing the different forces that were available, and this is all based on the lines of different C-Series lines of Citadel miniatures and Ralph miniatures that were being sold by Games Workshop at the time. And then your, I guess, emergent narrative of what the old world and the Warhammer world was eventually going to look like. It's definitely, it's got charm. It's so out there. You can hear all the in-jokes. It very much feels like early Games Workshop products, where you can tell that most of this was the friends that were all together playing these games, having a laugh and putting it down on paper. Names like Tin Khan, right? Like just some of the the pop culture stuff that was just sort of ground together to make these books really does make them a product of their times. So I hope you enjoyed that walk down memory lane looking at Forces of Fantasy. What a crazy supplement, and what a great thing to be able to have a record of the armies of the folks that actually playtested this game available basically in perpetuity, because you can see that little book that was added in basically is just the record of what was being played with at the time. So we'll do more of these in the future. I think we're going to jump over to Warhammer 40,000 probably for the next one, take a stroll down memory lane and show you the Rogue Trader, which I have a great many copies, but we'll find one that isn't going to fall apart. So we'll see you next time for more GMG reviews, Throwback Thursday edition. Till next time, I'm Ash. Handbook Gaming. I hope you enjoyed that video. If you want to support the channel, of course, like and subscribe and hit the little bell below so you get notifications when I post future content. I do post stuff 7 days a week. If you want to support the channel further, you can, of course, buy a t-shirt through Spreadshirt, buy a measuring gauge or objective markers from Death Ray Designs, or, of course, most importantly, there is Patreon. Patreon is what makes all this possible, keeps the lights on, pays for the studio costs, pays for the equipment, model costs, and everything else, and most importantly, puts food in my kids' bellies and a roof over their heads. Big thanks to everyone, past, future, who supported me. I do this stuff because of you guys, and of course, I will continue doing it as long as I can.